All right, well, good evening, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. We still have a few people arriving, but we want to try to keep on time tonight. It's amazing to see everybody here again tonight, such a good turnout. I'm happy to see people who were here last week again, and I'm really happy to see new faces as well. So welcome, everybody. We're so glad you're here. I am Linda Hamilton. I am the Redlands coordinator for the program called Accelerate Neighborhood Climate Action, better known as ANCA. So this is a program that brings climate action down to the neighborhood level. And that's a place where everybody can be involved and where individual action can be turned into collective action. And we believe that that is necessary to work as a community and at the neighborhood level, because as much as we need the massive, immediate action at the national level worldwide, it's really not happening anywhere close to what needs to be happening right now. Probably you all agree with that, right? And that's even though scientists have been warning us, they've been warning us for a long, long time that we are in trouble. So let's take a look at that for a moment. All right. So again, this is one of the first things that I read when I started looking into climate change. And this was a warning that came out in 1992. And it was signed by 1,700 leading scientists from all over the world. And this is what they had to say. We, the undersigned senior members of the world scientific community, hereby warn all humanity of what lies ahead. A great change in our stewardship of the earth and the life on it is required if vast human misery is to be avoided and our global home on this planet is not to be irretrievably mutilated. And then 25 years later, and I'm not really sure why it took 25 more years. However, the movie Inconvenient Truth was in the middle here somewhere, but 25 years later, in 2017, a second warning was issued. That one was even more dire. That was signed by 15,364 leading scientists from almost all nations, and that number is way over 20,000 now. So there is a very strong consensus among scientists that this is real and this is very, very serious. 2 years later, in late 2019, 11,000 scientists declared a climate emergency. And then back in 2021, just last year, in November, right before the UN, or right after, I should say, that after the UN report, the IPCC report was released, my new hero, Antonio Guterres, declared Code Red for humanity. He's one of the few world leaders that I know of who is willing to speak the truth these days. So that's kind of where we are today. Tonight, we're going to be talking about the extreme water shortages in the world and in the Southwest, right here where we live, and how we need to prepare for living in a world with less water available to us. So we want to begin tonight by asking you to turn to a person nearby, next to you or behind or in front, somebody preferably that you didn't drive here with, and just to share your name and what it is about this long-term drought and having less water in the future that concerns you, okay? So just take a moment. Becky's going to ring a bell when we start. She's going to ring a bell after 1 minute, then you change, and then she'll ring a bell at the end of 2 minutes, okay? sentence. What was it that you shared? Anybody?
Agriculture.
Concerned about agriculture, yeah. And San Joaquin Valley, yeah. Okay, another concern.
So it may become an economic problem where we'll have to spend more money. Some people won't be able to spend as much money or get water as they want to.
Right, just for the water that we use in our
personal
homes.
use, yeah.
Yeah. Any other concerns that we shared that were something different? Yes.
Infrastructure.
Infrastructure, say another word, Patrick.
Like ensuring that we have the infrastructure to deal with like a short or a lower water supply going forward, and that we have the things in place to be able to capture rain when it does happen.
Okay, great. So that a whole different kind of infrastructure maybe than we have now. All right, great. Thank you for sharing those. So last week I told you quite a bit about ANCA. But for those of you who are new here tonight, I just want to say a little bit about it, and you can definitely catch some of us later and ask more questions if you have them. But the ANCA program was started in Denver, Colorado as a nonprofit organization, and then it was adopted by the city of Boulder. And I happen to know the people who started it, and when I heard Boulder, which is a similar community to Redlands, adopted, I thought, I'd like to really see if this would really work in Redlands. So this is a neighborhood-based program. We're starting from the bottom up to build community resilience to deal with the impacts of severe climate change. And it's been shown many times over that it's the local community, and especially the neighborhood where you live, that is the most important place when things start to get really tough. So our program has two parts. One is an ongoing educational program to help us all learn more about climate change and to develop the new skills that we're going to need in a changing world. So this 5-week series is an introduction to an ongoing program. Starting in April, we're going to shift to this being a monthly event, and we want to involve many other organizations that are involved in some way in climate, and as well as individuals who have knowledge and skills to share. Some of you in this room may be some of those people. And then the second part of the program is we will be providing professionally facilitated planning events in neighborhoods where residents themselves will create neighborhood action plans for building climate resilience and reducing carbon emissions. And we call them climate action forums. And those are going to begin hopefully in the spring in interested neighborhoods. We currently have a local steering committee here in Redlands that has helped to launch the program, and I'd like to introduce any of them who are currently in the room. Would you just stand up and say your name very quickly?
Mario Saucedo.
Who else is in the room?
Diane Linder.
Anybody else? Belgique? We're way back there. And Claudia Ruiz. Okay. I think Catherine and some others are.
You're very busy, but.
Okay. All right. So those are some of the members of our steering committee. We also have a number of organizations in Redlands that are providing support of various kinds to this program, and they include the City of Redlands, the University of Redlands, the Environmental Studies Department, ESRI, and a number of other environmental groups in town. And so last but not least, I would like to introduce any local officials. And I know we have one here. And where did she go? There she is. Denise Davis. Denise, do you just want to say a word to the group? We're so happy that you're here tonight.
Thank you.
It's great to see such a wonderful turnout. I'm sorry I couldn't make the event last week. I had a work meeting. But as Linda knows, I have been an enthusiastic supporter of this project from the beginning. I'm a firm believer in local solutions to these bigger pressing issues in our lives. And this turnout tonight, like I said, is very encouraging. I know a lot of people here, but if we don't know each other, I hope that we have the opportunity to get to know each other. Feel free to reach out and connect. Anything we can do at the local level as it relates to climate change, sustainability, and the City Council, I'm all for it. So thank you again for being here.
Okay, so our agenda tonight is very much like last week, except we have a panel, a 3-person panel tonight. So we will have, that'll be about 40 minutes, 10-minute Q&A, followed by a brief guided discussion, and then our closing, and then the most important part is just getting acquainted time afterwards. So we hope you'll all plan to stay and just talk to each other, get to know each other. So we want to introduce our speakers next, but before I ask Mario Sacedo to come up to do that, I just want to explain a little bit about the panel, the dynamic here. So each of the 4 panels for the remainder of this month, there will be one person from the university, there will be one person from the city, and there will be one person from ANCA. So in tackling the biggest challenge that humanity has ever faced, we really do need the whole community working together. We need the knowledge that resides in the university. And in fact, in some communities, the university has been the driving force behind climate action. We need the planning, the policies, and the funding that only the city can provide. And we need the focus and the commitment that nonprofit organizations like ANCA, but many others in this community and others that they can bring to the table. And then most importantly, we need all of you. We need your energy, we need your concerns, your ideas, your talents, your creativity, and of course your involvement. If there ever was a time to step up, I kind of think this is it. It's like in times of crisis, which I deeply believe that we are in, it's just critical for everybody to be like working together, like we did back in World War II, which Tyra talked about last week, but only be clear that this crisis is even more serious. It's now everything is at stake. And so with that, I'd like to ask Mario to introduce our speakers for tonight. So if you come up, Mario, and with our speakers would come up to the table here right now.
Thank you, Linda. My name is Mario Salcido, and I'm going to take a minute to let you know that I am a long life resident here of Redlands. I'm a retired city employee. I work actually in the water department and water distribution. So I really wanted to be part of the speaker to introduce our speakers tonight. Before I get started, I just want to acknowledge with everything that's going on in the world today, I want to celebrate and acknowledge the International Day of Women. So thank you for all the women for their hard work, and we look forward to working together. And on behalf of I'm part of the steering committee as well. So on behalf of the steering committee, let me introduce our speakers by reading their bio. First, Hillary Jenkins. Hillary Jenkins holds a PhD in Earth and Ocean Sciences from Duke University with the expertise in paleoclimatology and dendroclimatology, isotope, geochemistry, and hydrology. She's a professor of environmental studies at the University of Redlands, where she teaches the course in geology, hydrology, oceanography, and climate science. Her current research and interests include tree rings and extreme drought, air pollution, forest ecosystem growth, and groundwater fluxes in the monotone mountain ecosystems. Dr. Jenkins also studies disturbances with a focus on fire in California and severe weather events like downburst in the Peruvian Amazon. She currently manages a network of piezometer installed in the meadows of San Bernardino Mountains to monitor our groundwork hydrology. Dr. Jenkins loves field work and the opportunity to explore natural world through the science method. She uses lectures and demonstrations to visualize the scientific concepts in class and brings her students to the field whenever she can. John Harris is, oh, sorry. Do you want me to introduce all three of them at one time? Okay, so John Harris, our next speaker after Hillary, John received his Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering degree from the University of Arizona and is a licensed professor of professional engineer. He joined the City of Redlands team in 2020 as a Municipal Utilities and Engineering Director, overseeing an engineering and construction of capital improvement programs and projects. The collection of treatment of wastewater and treatment of distribution of potable and non-potable and recycled water, and the city's water rights entitlements. Prior to Redlands, he was employed by the city of Big Bear Lake, California, where he managed public services during the periods of extreme drought and periods of extreme precipitation. He was also employed by the city of Montrose, Colorado, and worked for the United States Air Force F-16 Test and Development Program for 20 years, where he managed several large military international programs in multiple countries. Welcome, John. Next, Tyra Degler is a biologist and an environmental planner who has done scientific work in climate resilience. She has a bachelor's degree in ecology and in voluntary biology from the University of Colorado and Master of Science in Environmental Management from the University of San Francisco. Welcome as we begin our speaker with Hillary.
Just bear with me while we hook this up. All right, well, thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to be with you all tonight. My purpose is going to be to highlight a few examples to you of the shifting nature of water distribution on a global scale, and importantly, the impact that this is having on communities around the world. The Earth's average global temperature has increased by more than 2 degrees Fahrenheit since the Industrial Revolution. And the outlook for temperature is somewhat clear. Although models disagree, in general, we can anticipate and expect an increase in average global surface temperature with time. And in particular, we anticipate this will increase over the next century. However, when we start to consider, just gonna hold that, I think, when we start to consider what this means for water distribution, the story is a bit more complex. And so I'm going to pose a question to you this evening. Do you think rainfall will increase or decrease in the near future?
Depends on where you live.
Okay, so we think maybe it depends. How many people think it is going to increase? How many people think it's going to decrease? Do the rest of you think it depends? Or you're reserved? I often with my students give the option, I reserve judgment. It's one of the choices on a multiple choice question such as this. Well, this is the question I pose to you now, and spoiler alert, to some degree you are correct. It depends on where you live. Well, let's take a look at whether precipitation is increasing or decreasing in a couple of places around the world. I'm going to bring us over here to the southeastern portion of Australia, where if you have read in the news, quite recently, this part of the world has experienced an unprecedented flooding. In fact, just over a week ago, a massive storm system delivered 31 inches of rainfall in 4 days to the states of Queensland and New South Wales. This actually represents about 70% of the total rainfall that this region receives annually, and they received it in 4 days. Unfortunately, this flooding hazard claimed 18 lives in Australia. 28,000 homes and businesses have been flooded, 53,000 people are without power, and currently over 300,000 people are under an evacuation warning. This is currently, as another storm is on the horizon. Unfortunately, while Australia is dealing with flooding, something very different is happening in another part of the world, on the eastern side of the South American continent. This region is home to the Paraná River Basin, which is actually the second largest basin in South America, second only to the Amazon. The Paraná provides water to 40 million people who live in 4 countries: Brazil, Argentina, Paraguay, and Uruguay. This river is currently at its lowest level in 77 years. This is a result of below average precipitation for 5 consecutive years in this region. Unfortunately, this has devastated in particular the crop industries of Brazil and Argentina. In particular, the soy industry and corn production has been fairly devastated. Water scarcity is a major problem for cities that live along the Paraná, like Rosario City here in Argentina. And increased fire has been observed in southeastern Brazil. This has become so severe that actually last fall, Argentina declared a national emergency, in large part because many of their large cargo ships were unable to make it down through the river to get out into the Atlantic Ocean for trade. Unfortunately, other places that aren't so dependent on precipitation aren't out of harm's way either. So I'm going to take us into the northern hemisphere to this part of the world. This is the country of Pakistan, and we can see the subcontinent here of India, located to the south, Afghanistan up here to the northwest. This is the Indus River. The Indus River provides water to 270 million people living in this area. Unlike the Paraná, the Indus River actually does not rely on seasonal precipitation. It instead relies on seasonal snow and ice melt, which is coming from a series of glaciers located in the mountain ranges to the northeast. These ranges are the Himalaya, the Karakoram, and the Hindu Kush. An examination of changes to these glaciers over the past 20 years has yielded some disturbing results. This figure illustrates changes in glacial ice thickness between 2000 and 2019. A positive change or a growth in ice is depicted by blue or gray coloration. A negative change or a decrease in ice is depicted in yellow or red. And unfortunately, as you can see in the figure, 100% of the glaciers in this region are in negative mass balance, meaning that they are growing thinner or losing ice from year to year. This has caused projections to indicate that this river will not be sustainable in the future for the 270 million people that rely on this meltwater annually, and has rather dire predictions as we move toward 2100. So, given these few examples, I ask you again, will rainfall increase or decrease in the near future? And as you can see, it depends on where you live. The answer is both of these things are likely to occur. And this is in large part because the water cycle, or the cycling of the water through the Earth system, is closed, meaning it acts as a closed loop, as depicted here. And if you hark back to perhaps middle school science days talking about the water cycle, really that concept is still appropriate today. This depicts the movement and fluxing of water from reservoir to reservoir, but you can see that it forms a loop. What this means is that increasing water in one reservoir by default means decreasing it in another. So what does this mean for California? Let's bring things back to where we live. Well, this is a depiction of annual average precipitation over the state of California. And this is an average compiled over about a 60-year period to show typically over a year what do we expect to see. We receive about 193 million acre feet of rain annually. However, 153 million of this falls north of this line. What this means is that 79% of California's rain falls north of the San Francisco Bay Area. Or, by default, 70% of our state receives about 21% of the rainfall. If we think about the current condition, and if you've looked at the drought index lately, it's a bit bleak. We can see that 100% of California is in a state of moderate or extreme drought. If we look at the reservoirs, which give us a little bit longer time scale indication, unfortunately, all of them are currently below their historical average. This animation will show you the snow water equivalent, or how much water is present in the snow that fell over this past winter season, which is when the majority of precipitation is delivered to California. Currently, the snowpack's about 55 to 65% of normal for the month of March. But what I want you to focus on in the animation is that things seem to be rapidly changing from week to week. And in fact, this past winter season was a roller coaster. October was the second wettest October we've had in 100 years. November was the 31st driest. December was the 23rd wettest year we've had in 100 years, and January was the 7th driest. If you're getting whiplash, you're not alone. Unfortunately, when we look at kind of what's happened over the last 20 years or so, the situation is a bit bleak. This is a plot of the water year precipitation, so precipitation between October and September, every year from 2000 to 2021, and it's comparing how unusual that was to the previous century. And if it's unusually wet, it plots blue, unusually dry, plots brown. What we can see is that the entire western half of the United States was anomalously dry for this 21-year period. If we integrate temperature into this signal and combine temperature and precipitation into a soil moisture index, this actually becomes even more extreme. Soil moisture over 2000 to 2021 was the most anomalously dry period that we've had since the year 800. What does this mean as we think about California's future? This is a plot and based on an article in Nature Climate Change that was published in 2018 by Swain et al., which plots a model of the frequency, or rather the change in frequency of extremely wet seasons moving forward to the year 2075. This is specifically for Southern California. And we can see that we would anticipate an increase in the number of extremely wet seasons. An increase perhaps in precipitation sounds like good news. But when we model what is likely to occur with extremely dry seasons, we see a very similar trend. We anticipate, in addition to an increase in the frequency of extremely wet seasons, an accompanying increase in the frequency of extremely dry ones too. We can combine these together into what Swain refers to as a whiplash event, and look at the likelihood of flip-flopping between an anomalously wet and an anomalously dry year with time. And we can see that this projects that the number of whiplash events back and forth between extreme wet and extreme dry is likely to occur in the future. So, I will conclude by returning to that initial question. Will rainfall increase or decrease in the near future? The answer is yes, and both. Thank you.
Okay, it's good to see so many people here today. It's It's nice to scan the room and I see a lot of folks that are in my business in the water field, if you will. I see Eddie in the back and several others. And I'm glad to see that you're as passionate after work as you are during work about water. I'm John Harris. I work for the City of Redlands. I'm the Utilities and Engineering Director. I have several slides to go through, and so I'm going to kind of buzz through the first few fairly quickly. What I wanted to do was take it from where Hillary left off and kind of drill down further towards our local area and give you a sense of how we get water and what our challenges are here in Redlands. So in the state of California, there are really three primary water transmission projects, if you will, big piping projects. There's the Colorado River Aqueduct, which, as you can imagine, brings water from the Colorado River into Southern California. I'm from Colorado, by the way, and so we frequently hear from, my wife is here with me, we hear from our neighbors and friends in Colorado about curtailments on the Colorado River, and that's starting, those rumors are bleeding into California, that might affect us. I can tell you that we would not be directly, here in Redlands, would not be directly impacted by curtailment on the Colorado River. We could be indirectly affected. Some of the communities south of us that take water out of this pipe also have entitlements through the state water project. So if things get dire, they could call on those rights, which would affect us indirectly. The second big project is the Los Angeles Aqueduct. Again, these are self-describing names. That brings water from the eastern side of the state into the LA area. The one we're most concerned with is the California Aqueduct, also known as the State Water Project. That carries water down from Lake Oroville and Shasta. And so when Hillary spoke about how most of the precipitation is happening in the north end of the state, that's not necessarily a bad thing for us as long as it finds its way to one of those reservoirs and we can get that water down here to the southern part of the state. So state water project supply, I'm sorry if I have my back to you, but I left my glasses at home today, so I have to stand up to see as well. There are 42 million acre feet in entitlements on that project right now, and about half of that in actual deliveries. Part of that is because the project was never completely built out. LA Metro Water District is the largest contractor here locally. San Bernardino Valley Municipal Water District, I'm sure you've all heard them. They are a contractor there who we call if we need state water project here locally. 29 contractors on the project. I'm a nerdy engineer, so I have to give lots of numbers. 28 dams, lots of pumping stations, and it's a 600-mile long project. It's a massive project. Locally, San Bernardino Valley Municipal Water District, in a good year when there's 100% available water, they have entitlements to a little over 100,000 acre feet of water. Last year, that was reduced to 5% statewide, so 5% of 100,000, roughly 5,000 acre feet. That's a massive reduction. We were hopeful that things were going to get better, but we started the year off this year with a 0% allocation. That's gotten somewhat better. They have increased to 15% now, and we're hopeful that we'll continue to see precipitation throughout the year, and we can call on that water if we need it. Kind of a busy picture here, but I wanted you to just get a sense of how complicated moving water around the state of California is. It's just a pictorial of local, regional, local, state, and federal water projects that move water all throughout the state. So here in Redlands, where do we get our water from? Well, we could call on state water project water if necessary. We rarely do that. I don't think we will have to do that anytime in the near future, let's hope. We take water from two primary sources, if you will, surface water and groundwater. And we have two surface water sources, the first being the Santa Ana River watershed. That water, as you can imagine, is generally snow melt up in the mountains, and it finds its way down into the river and makes its way down here to Redlands. And the second is Mill Creek, similar scenario. We're taking precipitation out of the mountains into tributaries and through Mill Creek. Is there a pointer on this? I don't know if you can see. Okay. So this is the river, and this is Mill Creek. Here are our two surface water treatment plants. We have the Tate water treatment plant that treats water primarily out of Mill Creek, and the Hinkley plant that primarily treats river water. And it's roughly 2/3 of our water comes from Hinckley, and 1/3 from Tate, if you're curious about those numbers. I mentioned about half of our water comes from those surface sources. The other half comes from the groundwater basin. We sit on top of the Bunker Hill Basin, and I think we here in Redlands and in this region are situated better than most other communities in that respect. So when we're not seeing a lot of precipitation and there's not a lot of runoff, we have our groundwater wells that we can fall back on. The blue dots in this map are potable wells, so we're able to treat the groundwater as it's extracted from the ground and put it right into the potable water distribution system. The purple dots are non-potable wells. They're either used for non-potable uses like landscape irrigation, or in some cases we can get that water to a facility where it can be treated and we can put that into the potable system as well. So I talked about the basin. It's not all doom and gloom. You know, we're sitting on top of a 5.7 million acre feet water bank, if you want to think of it that way. But the challenge is this line here at about a little over 3 million acre feet is the level at which most of us, including here in Redlands, would have to begin deepening our wells. So you can see over time we're getting closer and closer to that. I heard somebody say earlier when we were talking about the things that we're concerned about, somebody mentioned economics. Well, drilling a new well is extremely expensive, and we're not on the right trajectory to avoid that in the future. I think if there's one pet peeve I have when it comes to water, it's when I hear people refer to the drought of 2021 or the 3-year drought. You know, I would argue, and I've given you this slide to hopefully support my argument, that we've actually been in a drought for a little more than 20 years. And if you look at this period here, things are not getting better here, obviously. And this drought appears to be much worse than the last 20-year drought that we had back in the, I guess that would be from the 40s to the 60s. So this drought didn't just start last year, it didn't start 3 years ago. We've been in a drought since the late 1990s. So how are things looking now? Are things getting better? Well, not necessarily. Hillary touched on some of this, but this is a screenshot from last week, March 3rd, from the U.S. Drought Monitor. You can squint your eyes and look at that and see what the problem is. The darker colors are more impacted by drought. There's less water in those areas. And you'll see that there's no white or yellow anywhere on this map. This is San Bernardino County, so we are probably, somewhere in this neck of the woods. So some facts, and I'll add to what Hillary said. We're currently, despite the rain that we've had recently, and I appreciate every drop that falls from the sky, we are currently on track for the driest 3-year period on record as far back as records go here in the state. Water is never going to be cheaper than it is now. Somebody mentioned economics earlier. We will be dealing with this forever and ever, in my opinion. The water use restrictions that we're all experiencing today, I do believe this is the new norm. This is where we will be moving forward. Things get more expensive from this point forward if we don't learn to protect that resource. And here in Redlands, to throw some more nerdy engineering numbers at you, 70 to 75% of all the water, every drop of water that we treat and distribute here in Redlands goes on somebody's lawn. It goes to outdoor landscape irrigation. So what could happen in the future? So we've been talking lately about restricting water use for outdoor uses, and all of the city's municipal code restrictions deal with outdoor uses. There is some talk now at the state level about the first ever indoor water use restrictions. So what could you see in the future? Well, right now you can only irrigate your lawn every other day or 3 days a week here in Redlands. It may be that in the future you're limited to some length of time to use your, I don't know, your dishwashers or your clothes washers or something like that. That could be a big change for all of us. I'll tell you though that here in Redlands, as long as I work here, life and safety water uses will always be a priority. So that means that's change for all of us, right? I mean, I come from Colorado and I like to have a green grass in my front yard too, but I'm certainly willing for it to be a little less green if it means that somebody in a vulnerable portion of our community gets the water that they need to survive. It's not all doom and gloom though. So what is Redlands doing? I mentioned that I scanned the room. There are a lot of water folks here. We are working together regionally to make sure that everybody has water, so that my kids have water and my kids' kids have water, and yours as well. I see Sam Fuller in the back of the room. He and I were meeting today with the Captain Water Company. Betsy's here. We have met weekly or bi-weekly, I guess, for months and months and months to make sure that when one water distribution network perhaps is having a little trouble serving their customers, that we can supplement and vice versa. We're members of the Groundwater Council, as are 11 other agencies, I believe. And the whole goal of the Groundwater Council is to sustain that resource. And so we're working hard to make sure that we can do that. My predecessors did a wonderful job, and one of them is here in the room today, in diversifying our water resources by purchasing water rights in various companies. So I mentioned that we have the surface water rights, we have groundwater rights, we have shares in a variety, 7 or 8 different water companies in town. We have cooperative agreements and emergency connections with other utility providers in our area, so that if we need to share water back and forth, we can do that. We at the city have a water shortage contingency plan that is tied to our ability to deliver water. So as Hillary hit the nail on the head, it's not just about having water, it's being able to access that water, right? So as it becomes more and more difficult for us to access the water and get it to you, we will require you to reduce your water use so that we can serve others. I will have some contact information on the last screen. If you have any questions about the city's water conservation rebates and programs, I'm your guy. I'm not your guy, but I can get you the person that can answer those questions. My staff is happy to come out to your home or your business, do a water audit for you, maybe help you set up your irrigation timer, and talk through all of those rebates. We're really pressed for time. I could talk to you all day about our recycled water system. We are actually treating effluent from our wastewater treatment plant, and we convert that to usable, non-potable water, not drinkable water, but it's about 4,500 acre-feet a year. And we're currently right now designing 2 large recycled reservoirs so that we can store more of that water and expand our system. We are hopeful that we're going to increase our percolation in the future. We might do that with our state water project rights. SWP water is not the easiest to treat. It tends to be full of organics and sediment, which makes it more expensive to treat, but it's great for percolating in the ground. We're currently replacing water lines and water meters. We have a lot of water loss in our system. To give you a sense of what it costs, we spend about $1 million a mile to replace a water line. When you consider all the street paving that has to go on and actually replacing that pipe, we have about 400 miles of pipe in our system. And we have several wells that we're rehabilitating and bringing back online that have been idle for some period of time. Just real quickly, this is a busy graph, but it shows you how much water we use in our peak season. This blue line here is 2014, right before water conservation became a way of life. And you can see that ever since then, the impact that water conservation had, it works very well. This is our safe yield. This is the amount of water that we could extract from the groundwater basin and sustain the resource. And these are actual extractions. You can see again in 2014 when we started our water conservation efforts. We're now below that sustainable yield line. So I wanted to leave you with this. The obvious answer to that question, what can you do, is reduce your water use. I really wanted to drill it down to a couple of things for you to think about. Number one, think about the timing of your water use. Hillary talked about the timing of snowmelt. We all heard back in October that it was going to be a great water year. And the snowpack was, a gazillion% of whatever it normally is that time of year, but here we are today and it's at 65% of what it normally is. So our peak water distribution season is July through September. perhaps think about how you use water in that 3-month period. If I could leave you with one thought, if everybody irrigates their grass for 10 minutes per zone per day, and you reduce that by 1 minute, everybody in the city did that, we have a potential to save about 60 acre-feet of water a day, 2.6 million gallons of water a day. That's a huge amount of water, just by turning your irrigation timer back by 1 minute. I realize that was really fast and it was a lot of information, but thanks for your time.
All right, hello. Hi. Hi. All right, while we're getting set up, I do have a joke, just to kind of lighten the mood. Okay, so 2 fish decide to go out swimming one day. As they're swimming along, an older fish passes by them. He turns to them and says, "Hey boys, how's the water today?" A little while later, the 2 fish are still swimming. The first fish turns to the second fish and says, "What the heck's water?" Yes, a lovely dad joke. All right, well, that's okay. I'm going to ramble for a bit anyway, so we can still wait. Water conservation is incredibly important when it comes to building resilient communities. Water conservation is incredibly important when it comes to building resilient communities. In fact, it may be the most important part of resilience planning. This is because we all need water to survive. It's one of our basic needs: food, water, and shelter. If we don't have water, you'll probably die in about 3 days. No one wants that. It's impossible to build a resilient community where everyone dies in 3 days. But because of this, and because we all need to do things like cook, shower, please tell me everyone showered here within the last week, drink water, we often run into trouble when it comes to implementing water conservation measures on a much larger scale. It's a lot harder for us to conceive of what that might look like without putting us in some form of severe discomfort, or maybe even putting us in danger, especially since we are in a desert. It does get hot. Dehydration is a huge issue. A lot of people get very, very sick when they are dehydrated. A lot of people die when they are dehydrated. And that's just dehydration. Again, that's not talking about hygiene, cleaning our homes, cooking our food, producing. Everything in this room was produced at some point using water, even if it was just to cool the machines that made it. Water is integral to our way of life. And this gentleman here has a very large bottle. That is a very large water bottle, sir. Where did you get that?
My sister got it to me for my birthday a few years ago. It's cold, you know.
Yeah, I mean, good job. Good job on your water drinking. Y'all should probably drink more water. It's a bit of an issue.
Gallon a day.
It's gone to So when we talk about water conservation, there's really 3 genres, as I say, for water conservation and how we can implement water conservation and water resilience planning. The first one is to partner with local governments and businesses, nonprofits, basically any organization that is larger than yourself that will be able to enact changes on a greater scale and implement them as stricter measures. There is only so much work that you as an individual can do. There's a lot more work that a government can do. We talked about the water conservation measures that were implemented in California. That wouldn't have been done unless we had the government on our side. So get together with your local government, make it known that you need water conservation. We all need water conservation measures and water resilient measures. Neighborhoods can showcase what's important to them. This is incredibly important for all politicians at all levels. They do listen to their constituents. And if their constituents aren't making enough noise when it comes to water conservation, water resilience, they'll move on to another issue. It takes a lot of work to run a city, a state, a country. There are a lot of issues. Sometimes certain issues can get almost pushed aside because no one's talking about them. If you make it known that this is important to you and you have enough people also on your side,
you can get the government to listen. So you can reach out to your local governments, utilities, and nonprofits to see what water conservation programs are available. And I mean this in two ways. The first way is sort of what John talked about, where he can come out and do a water audit. Maybe not him personally, but he can send someone. But they can do a water audit. They can see how you're doing in terms of water usage. There's water rebate programs. Know what is available to you when it comes to terms of water conservation and water resilient planning. The other program that I'm talking about is government programs that are focused on water conservation and water planning from a more infrastructure level. If the government is planning to put caps on how much you can irrigate already, that's in the works. You don't necessarily need to go talk to your local government about that. It's already being planned for. It's just a waste of your time and their time if you're talking about something that they're already doing. So know what government, nonprofits, and utilities are doing to improve water conservation, water resilience, and also know how they can help you in your whole water conservation journey. Coordinate with your neighborhood or apartment complex to bring water conservation to the forefront of discussion. Again, these slides are mostly about the government, but anything with a lot of power, such as business, apartment management companies, et cetera, anything like that has the ability to make a bigger impact than you as an individual. And if you have enough people on your side, it improves your chances of being listened to. So definitely coordinate with like-minded people. That's what ANCA is here for. That's what we're doing. That's what we're all about. And finally, when you actually meet up with these businesses, these governments, these nonprofits, there's a few things that you can talk to them about. You can discuss the reason why water conservation is necessary. You had several very lovely presentations this evening that talks about why drought is happening and how it will affect us. The benefits of conserving water, and definitely throw in there the money issue, the money aspect. Money talks more than anything else. So if you can convince a local business owner that they're going to save money by conserving water, that just makes things all the better. Liabilities for not conserving water. What will happen to us if we don't act now? And finally, actions needed to achieve water goals. You don't want to go in there and just say, do something. You want a plan, you want some action items they can act on, that they can look into, a starting point, a jumping off point for them to use as they continue on. All right, so we talked about the first genre, which is getting involved with local governments, higher powers that be. And as John has already pointed out, plants and landscaping, which comes to our second way, our second genre of water resilience and water conservation planning, which is decrease your water usage. This is the one that a lot of people will talk about when they talk about water conservation, water resilience planning. Decrease your water usage. And more importantly, decrease your water usage in plants and landscaping, because that is where most people waste the most amount of water. You don't need a pretty lawn to survive. It's an added, it's a bonus, it's not necessary. But just because you don't need a pretty lawn to survive doesn't mean that you can't have a pretty lawn and still conserve water. You can have the best of both worlds. Use native plants, or choose plants that need less water when you're designing your garden. We have a very lovely, I don't know, I won't point to that, it's fine. But we have a very lovely example of a garden that has cacti. It's beautiful, not a blade of grass in sight. This thing probably doesn't need hardly any water except for what normally comes from the sky. You'll save a lot of money that way. You can also practice xeriscaping. Xeriscaping is the comprehensive landscaping approach for water conservation that combines planning and design to create landscapes that need less water and retain more water on site. We've talked about the native plant aspect, but the second part of it is to create landscapes and plan landscapes that need less water. That's where you can do things like group plants according to water needs. Plants that need more water can be grouped together Plants that need less water can be grouped together. That way, you're not wasting water and potentially killing things by drowning plants that don't need a lot of water. You can also make changes to how you've landscaped. If you're on a hill, for example, plants that need more water go up top, plants that need less water go at the bottom. You water the plants at top, the water trickles down. You now don't have to water as much as you would if they were just spread out all over the place. And finally, maintain healthy soils with mulching to minimize runoff and retain water. Somehow, when we talk about water conservation, water resilience, drought, soils always get left out. People don't tend to think about soil and water in the same conversation. But it is incredibly important that our soils remain healthy to keep that water in the soil instead of running off, evaporating, not replenishing our groundwater. It's not fun. And moving on also with this plants and landscaping, minimize turf areas or choose grasses that require less water. Now I can really talk about gardening trends in America, so if anyone wants a 5-week series on 20th century gardening trends, I'm available. I love talking about it. But Americans didn't really start with the grass lawns until about the 1920s, when it was really a display of wealth. You had money and time to maintain this super labor-intensive piece of land that did nothing. It didn't grow you food, it didn't give you shade, it was just this piece of land. But you could pay for the water, you could pay for the mowers. Look at that, you have new money. It's the 1920s, who cares? We're all drinking bootleg alcohol anyways. However, 1920s America is not the same as 2020s America, sadly, or maybe not so sadly, depending on your view of it. We need to decouple what we think of as a pretty lawn, what we think of as a beautiful backyard. We don't have to get rid of turf altogether. If you have dogs, children, they might get pricked by cacti, but you can still decrease the amount of turf in your backyard. And again, we have another beautiful example of cacti, of what it looks like to have a thriving garden that isn't grass and isn't non-native plant species from Europe or Eastern United States. This lawn also probably requires less labor because you can't cut it. It's a bunch of prickly stuff. You're gonna hurt yourself if you try to cut it, so you just kind of let it go. You plant it, you forget it, it looks beautiful. You can avoid watering during the heat of the day. The water will evaporate, but it will also damage your plants. Water acts as a magnifying glass to the sun, so if it lands on the leaves or petals, it could cause brown spots and damage, and your garden won't look as beautiful. You really should be watering anyways, if any of you don't like gardening. You really should be watering in the mornings or in the evenings, not during the heat of the day. And finally, use irrigation systems that reduce leakage and water demand. The first picture, the one at the very top, is what's known as a drip irrigation system. This goes right along the ground underneath the plants, and the water will drip out slowly but surely, seeping into the ground. Instead of that one sprinkler that I'm sure we all had growing up, and went up and over and up and over, and water goes everywhere, super fun to play with, not very efficient. I'm surprised anyone's lawns looked good with those sprinklers. You could also use, technology is great, automated irrigation systems. These systems have a lot of different functions. Sometimes they can use local weather data and say, hey, it rained on Monday. We don't need to water things on Monday. We can just shut off, let the rain do its work. Or it can say, hey, it's going to be a little hotter. We'll increase the watering. Or it's going to say, hey, it's going to be a little colder. We'll decrease the watering. These irrigation systems are awesome. If you really, really love your lawn and your garden, you should look into getting a smart irrigation system. They will help save you so much money and so much time because they do all the thinking for you. Now, we at ANCA don't just like individual actions. We like group actions, community actions. How do you take something as small as an individual garden and scale it up? Well, you can get together with other tenants in your neighborhood and campaign for more friendly landscapes. you can start a neighborhood water smart garden. Swap propagated succulents. Succulents are incredibly easy to propagate. Exchange gardening knowledge. Help others redesign their yards. Get together once a week in tea to talk about your cacti and how they're doing. All sorts of fun stuff. And you can bring it up to your HOA or neighborhood association. Sometimes HOAs can have rules around what plants are and are not allowed in your gardens. Bring it up with them, again, with that first slide where we talked about the benefits of water conservation, all of these lovely presentations that talk about how much water conservation is necessary. Get together with your neighborhood, force some change on your HOA. Repair leaks and upgrade water-efficient appliances. Leaking toilet can waste 21,000 gallons a year, literally money down the drain. You are not paying for it. Host a Fix a Leak Week to challenge tenants to find leaks and report water waste. Include leak detection and water-saving tactics in your home or business. And we have this really awesome program through the EPA, which is Water Sense. This works like those energy efficiency stickers that you see on appliances all the time, except for water. And I believe they say Water Sense products can save or are 20% more water efficient than non-Water Sense products. So if you're in the market for a new fridge or something, look into Water Sense. Now, the final genre of water resilience and water conservation planning is wastewater recycling. It is not enough to simply reduce our consumption because at some point you will need to consume water. We need to take the water that we consume and figure out a way to reuse it as much as possible. That's where wastewater recycling comes in. And here we have a wastewater recycling treatment plant, just in case you're wondering what John was talking about, what that looks like. Use recycled water for irrigation, toilet flushing, surface cleaning, and other processes. This is non-potable water, you don't want to drink it. Capture your water during a shower or not dumping pasta down the sink. Literally, just put a bucket in your shower, take whatever falls in the bucket and use it to water your plants. It's great, and you'll save money. Or you could capture runoff from rooftops with rain barrels or cisterns to reduce the demand on drinking and cooking water. If you have room for it, I strongly suggest putting up some sort of rainfall system and cistern. It'll save you money, it'll make you more resilient, and it's just better for the environment. And then finally, this is probably the most intensive one. It's the one for people who have the money and have the time. It is a gray water system. Gray water is gently used water from your bathroom, showers, tubs, and washing machines that has not come into contact with feces, but does contain traces of dirt, food, grease, and household cleaning products. Gray water systems are like the bucket in the shower idea, but on steroids, and also a lot more money. They reuse water in these areas of the home and garden. Simple systems like the one, your left, or your right, my right, your left, the one with the washing machine, that's a simple system. It doesn't use a pump. The water simply is captured and then distributed to other little cisterns throughout the garden using gravity, and these cisterns are buried under the ground so you don't need to see them. It just drips directly below the plant into the ground. And more complex systems use pumps to reduce and reuse water in toilets and for other non-potable needs. So that's the other one on the far end. You can see it captures water from the faucet and the tub, pumps it into a cistern that then pumps it into a toilet. Hopefully you're not drinking out of your toilet. If you are, I have a lot of questions and I don't know if I want to know the answer to any of them. Now before we close, I would like to end on this quote. Water, like religion and ideology, has the power to move millions of people, and all people, everywhere, every day, need it. Thank you.
As we transition to our next series, why don't everybody get up and for a short period of time and relax your legs, and then we'll move on to the next series. Give a minute.
So the question is the city looking at gray water for new housing?
a great question. The Building and Safety Department is not underneath me, but as long as it's authorized and allowed by state regulations, I can't imagine the city would not allow those systems. I would suggest maybe I give you a better answer and go back to the group and we can provide a better answer next week.
But it wasn't a question of not allowing it, it was a question of promoting it.
Is the city doing anything to promote it, I guess, that is the question.
Leaning towards requiring another expensive thing to go into the housing. I mean, maybe we're being faced with that. We'll
Yeah,
find
could
out.
be, I'm sorry, I just don't know the answer to that question. That's a great suggestion.
Other questions for any of the panelists? Yes.
So I have a question like in terms of other communities. So what do we need? The University of Maryland made the second green campus in the United States, ironically. The first one was the Arizona State, so ironically. So I didn't have knowledge back then, I don't have knowledge right now, but my question is this a problem?
Well, I missed the last sentence.
Is this a problem? Like that the University of Maryland, while because of like Southern California is in like huge drought in the last several years, like
Could you repeat the question up front?
So I think generally just summarizing, the University of Redlands is a very green campus, as is Arizona State. By the way, I'm a University of Arizona graduate, so I usually don't even say the words Arizona State University. I'll get past that tonight. And so the question was, is that a problem that we have these green campuses around the country? I
in
think
terms of
probably,
like water consumption, because like I walk around campus and there's lots of water being used.
yeah, there are probably several answers to that question. I will give you my answer, and I'd like to hear from the other panelists as well. I don't think it's necessarily a problem. For me, it's all things in moderation, right? One of the reasons I'm here in Redlands and my family came here just a little over a year ago is because it is a beautiful green place. That's not to say we can't conserve water and use it appropriately to beautify the community.
If I could just add to that, I'm aware that the students are trying to mobilize right now to address some of, just to prepare the campus better for climate change, and probably will be addressing that issue.
There's a question or comment from you.
Yes, and is the city enforcing conserving water? Because I haven't heard anything. I mean, 3 years ago, I remember that there was some kind of a schedule where you could water and someday, but I haven't heard anything more, and I was wondering if there are any programs that are doing that.
Yeah, great question. So we began our water conservation program and our water use restrictions about that time frame, right after 2014. You saw the slide, 2015, the water consumption went down. That's 100% due to our water conservation efforts. Yes, we are still in stage 2 water conservation measures. That's probably why you haven't heard anything since 2015. Nothing has changed since then. We are on restricted irrigation schedules. So if you have an odd numbered residential address, your irrigation day is, I'm looking at my wife because we have an odd number, it's Monday, Thursday, and Saturday. Even numbered residential addresses, your irrigation day is Tuesday, Friday, Sunday, and then we have no water Wednesday. And to answer the second part of your question, do we enforce those regulations? We do. We actually have 2 dedicated, we call them water waste investigators. They're almost like code enforcement officials that are dedicated to enforcing that section, chapter 1306 of the municipal code that deals with water conservation. That said, I'll tell you that I am not a fan of heavy-handed enforcement. So I encourage my staff when we see folks that aren't doing the right things to maybe meet with those folks and educate them and talk to them as opposed to levying heavy fines and that sort of thing.
Okay, I'll add to that comment because, yeah, I was shocked to see that your number of 75% of water is being used in landscape. I mean, that's absurd when we live in this place where it's a desert. And I myself, for example, I never looked at the water bill. I knew it fluctuated summer, but then I started saying, okay, let's look at the gallons I'm consuming. I live in a small house, I live on my own, and I was consuming 350 gallons on average. And I couldn't understand it. And I decided, okay, I'm taking off the sprinklers and being aware aware of the water consumption that I'm doing. Just the sprinklers, I'm just being aware, I'm doing what you were mentioning of putting the water and watering the plants. And now I was able to lower to 80 gallons. But what is interesting is that the bill didn't go down. And I looked at it. And honestly, I think the water should cost a lot more because when I looked at the bill, most of it is on the collection of the thing, but water usage is very little portion of the bill. And I think probably that would be a good incentive for people to do something about conserving water. That's my comment.
Yeah, and just to pick two words, be aware, I think that's the takeaway from that conversation. If we're all just more aware of how to use water, I think that's the takeaway message for today.
Well, we'll have time, I think, for one more question, because I want to respect everyone's time and the time of the Contemporary Club. I've seen 2 hands, so we have time for 2 questions. So we'll start with you, then we'll go to you.
One of the things that some other communities have done is, in the planning process for new houses, limit the amount of landscape, or grass in particular. Only allow a certain amount. I think Las Vegas does that. And city, I was a benefit of the city's program to take out turf and put in drought tolerant, well, not all drought tolerant, not all cactus, that's for sure. But with the drip system, I had lawn, they came out and measured my lawn, I got at least $1 a square foot to put in a drip system. I don't know, John, if that program's still underway, but I reduced my outside water use by 2/3. And it's a great program, but to start definitely with new development, to say you can only have a certain amount of lawn, and that would be a good start.
Thank you.
Along with this other program of paying for people to take out grass.
Last question or comment, Ms. Houston.
On a larger scale, people talk about saving water. Everybody that has any thought about their city will try to do something, but on a larger scale, I've heard in the past about converting ocean water, using ocean water and converting that. I know it rains in the ocean, and all that water could be used, whatever. And I'm from the old school where San Jose and that area, you used to see the clouds. It must be very expensive to do that. And the other thing, not to get political, but there's land here for reservoirs. But you say you would try to find the water. I don't know, I don't have a stick. But I'm saying if there are people in the world that need water, there's the ocean, convert it.
We'll have a few comments.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you for all of the comments and the questions, and I think, Hillary, you wanted to...
Oh, I would just respond to a couple of really interesting questions. Yeah, in terms of ocean, I guess one thing I didn't have a chance to discuss, but I think it's really interesting to think about the distribution of water. 97% of total water on Earth is found in the oceans. That certainly seems like an appropriate source. And desalinization is the process by which we can kind of prepare the water, extract the salt for use. Unfortunately, this is quite expensive, a process, and also ends up using quite a lot of energy. And so you kind of have to ask the question, do you end up using more water to cool what you're trying to, to cool the instrumentation that then you're using to extract the salts. So at this point, it's not necessarily feasible. But in terms of cloud seeding, I will say that's a fascinating conversation to think about, and has been done actually in Arizona, here in California as well. And unfortunately, and the one thing I would just say about that is, it is a closed loop system. So if you're generating, and certainly adding small particulates into the atmosphere creates a condensation point for water. You can actually get cloud droplets to form. They can grow and turn into rain, and it'll fall. It will work, I suppose, from an engineering perspective, but dumping that water in one location means taking it from another. And so that ultimately becomes a discussion about what that would mean for large-scale implementation.
Thank you. Well, before we wrap up completely, I had a few questions that I have for you. So, and I just want to get maybe one or two people to respond with your thoughts. But after everything that you've seen and heard tonight, what is one thing that you remember
from the presentation this evening? And just anybody, one thing you remember. One thing you heard.
Water is a closed system.
Thank you. Okay, there you go. All right. Yes.
That you can save a lot of water and money just by turning your irrigation 1 minute back.
1 minute back, save a lot of water. Yeah, okay, thank you.
7% of water goes to irrigation.
Ah,
Landscaping.
okay. 70% goes to landscaping. You all are paying very good attention. Thank you. So what's something you heard that really concerned you? Something that concerned you that you heard tonight? Yeah.
Sort of rapid cycling of cool and, or of wet and dry seasons.
The rapid cycling of the wet and dry seasons.
Yeah, I'm not sure we have the infrastructure prepared for stuff like flooding.
Right.
Like flash floods.
How it affects the infrastructure, flooding, and yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. Okay, and now I want to ask if, as you were listening to this, you had any idea that came to mind about something that you could do on a neighborhood level, something a neighborhood could do if they got together that would help to conserve water and also prepare for coming water shortages. Is there anyone who has an idea that's already kind of come into their mind about what a neighborhood could do? Yes?
Growing specific drought tolerant plants, maybe that, like the succulent exchange. I found that kind of nice and interesting.
Succulent exchange, thank you. Yeah. Nice, okay. Anything else? One more idea that you have that something you could do? Yeah.
As an early morning walker, I report broken sprinklers.
Report broken sprinklers, great, thank you. Okay, well I want you to keep on thinking and I want you to remember your ideas because in a few minutes, over there on that purple wall, we call the sticky wall, we have papers and we have markers and we would like you to share your ideas. Write an idea on a card. The wall is sticky so that you don't need tape, you just put the paper on the wall. We're keeping these, and if you were with us last week, then you know that we send them out afterwards so that we can continue to share our ideas and continue to think about what neighborhoods can do to help address these climate concerns. So I'm going to turn this back over to Linda then to close it out.
Thank you, Becky. So, first of all, we need to give another big thank you to our panel. Thank the library and Diane Shimoto. Is she in the room? Diane, there she is. Yeah. Thanks so much for all your help. Available. And we want to thank all of the volunteers who helped with this event. It does take quite a few of us to put this on. And then just a reminder that next week we're going to be talking about the increasing heat. Something we all need to be concerned about and as a community begin to address. So I hope you'll come back for that. Tell your friends, neighbors, bring a crowd with you. And if you found this evening valuable, which we hope you did, hopefully if you're on social media, you'd post something about it. We really want to start getting a lot of buzz going on in the community about climate change. Because our intent is to really mobilize this community. And finally, if you can stay a while, please do so. Get to know each other. Check out the room.